And I really believe that we are going to see young people like we did in the 60s. I think we're going to see young people start moving back to the land and farming regeneratively. I think we're going to see native traditions and rural traditions be brought up to the 21st century with all the innovations that permaculture and organic and regenerative farmers have made. So basically, I'm fired up, and I think it's an uphill battle here, but Mother Nature had the solution right in front of our eyes. We just didn't know what to look for, and now we're going full blast.
Hello, welcome to Cambridge Forum, coming to you live via Zoom. I'm Mary Stack, the director of Cambridge Forum, and today we're going to take a look at farming for the future, with a special emphasis on smart and sustainable ways of growing our food. To help us do this, we welcome three uniquely different individuals who are all equally passionate about farming. And I'd like to first of all thank you all for taking time out of a very busy harvesting season to make time for this. So that's really kind of you. Okay, so let's start first with you, Addy. Could you tell us about why you migrated into farming and how, why it's important to you, and not just the practice, but spreading the information to other people?
Definitely. So I got into the food industry, like Mary said, through the culinary world. I had started working in farm-to-table restaurants and eventually got the opportunity to be an executive chef and make a lot of those purchasing decisions. And I really was committed to farm-to-table. I felt like, knowing where your food comes from and supporting the areas right around you made the most sense and was the most nutritious for you. And I had, as a kid, grown up in New York City, but would spend summers on my great-grandmother's farm in Ithaca, New York. And even though the farm wasn't active by the time I got to visit it, just being out of the city in this green space was really inspiring. And I always kept that with me as I moved through life. And by the end of my time in the culinary world, I had realized that this like little dream that I'd had to be a farmer that had always kind of seemed silly or not achievable when I was in high school or even going into college. It seemed like not the smart choice, actually was something I really wanted to do and felt really close to my values and felt really important. And when I started doing it, I found that it filled every value and goal and mission that I had for myself. And I think it's really important for people to have access to understanding farming practices, understanding gardening, how to feed themselves, because as this pandemic has showed us, our national food system is really insecure, and having those skills under your belt is something that can encourage you to be a little bit more proactive in how you care about yourself in like a preventative way, eating well, and having confidence in the food that you're growing. All of those things felt really important to me. So I transitioned again back into the teaching role.
So how old are you?
I'm 29.
Well, you seem very, very young, and you seem to have a lot of sort of old knowledge about things like resiliency skills. So what are these resiliency skills that you think are so important?
Well, I think that knowing how to plant things is something that's starting to fade away from public knowledge. A lot of my contemporaries don't really know how to grow a tomato, or when to plant something or how much to water it. And I think that, the growing is something that's really important, but then taking that one step further and learning how to eat seasonally and how that's so healthy for you, and preserving your harvest just gives you the maximum you can out of your garden or out of your farm. And so preserving and canning, those are all these old skills that my great-grandmother taught me. My mother helped facilitate for me, and was something I just really held on to. So it's partially motivated by wanting people to feel confident, to have the skills to have this control over their diet and over their choices and having access to those things year round, and also just the joy of bringing some of those old skills back into the present.
Well, you talked about some of the chief challenges when you went into farming or came back to the East Coast and tried to set up some sort of a farm. You said the two big challenges were, one, having affordable land that was accessible.
Definitely.
And the other thing was you were concerned that the practice wasn't just going to create food for a kind of affluent percentage of the market. So how do you deal with those two particular challenges?
So I think that in Massachusetts or in New England in general, land is really expensive. And in some ways it's been good because they're trying to preserve the New England aesthetic in this, like, you know, the stone walls and having these big tracts of land. But it ends up getting bought by people who are very affluent and have the ability to just kind of buy it and hold it, and it's not being used. So there are some organizations here like Greenbelt that are trying to connect farmers to that space. And they have started offering incentives like tax breaks for landowners that put their land into agricultural use. So those are all things that are kind of like a baby step in the right direction, in my opinion. But I think that we need to go a little bit further, because as a young farmer, one of my goals is for the farm that I have to feed me for the rest of my lifetime and to feed my community. And renting land is not going to do that for me, because I can't put in things like fruit trees. I can't invest into the land if it's not something that's going to sustain me for the rest of my life. And so I think that, you know, there are ways to kind of make land accessible. It's like first time home buyers or farm incentives, right? Like, how do we make land have a really, like, how do we sell it to people who are going to use it in an appropriate way? Or, yeah, just ways like that. And I think with the other part, the CSA is really only sustaining like affluent buyers. I think that with organizations that I've worked for, like the one I work for now, Nourishing the North Shore, or there's a fabulous organization in Gloucester, Backyard Growers, that are kind of trying to address the fact that local food should not just be for the affluent, that everyone should have access to healthy food. They are basically helping to facilitate the farmers to people who can get the food. They're like Nourishing gleans or accepts donations from farms and takes it to food pantries. But I think that part of it is this attitude shift that needs to happen, that has sort of started to happen with coronavirus, where people are paying more attention to their local food systems. So instead of it just being for the affluent and for the poor at food banks, it needs to be like everyone wants to buy their produce from a farmer. It's not just a seasonal treat. You know what I mean? How do we make this part of our local economy in a long-term sustainable way?
So before I open that up to the other two gentlemen farmers, how far has an organization like the Community Supported Agriculture Group, CSA, which a lot of people have in their areas, where, if people don't know, the actual consumer invests upfront to the farmer to get a percentage of the harvest. So it's a kind of, you pay ahead.
Yep.
How successful do you think are systems like that in creating revenue for the farmer to do what he needs to do?
I think they're incredibly successful and incredibly important. I know most of the people that I know in my community here who are farmers depend on their CSA to get them started in the season, and it's the only way that they've learned to make money around here. I just think that a CSA initial, like to buy into a CSA, can be upwards of $600, and that's not affordable for a lot of families. Plus you have to travel to the farm, and if you don't have access to transportation, that's a barrier as well. So I think that there needs to be either a resurgence of farmers or a resurgence of farming practices or gardening, like intensive gardening in people's homes, to kind of facilitate local food in our local societies. You know what I mean? I think the Zen Center here in Beverly, for example, they've started this really fabulous welcome garden. It's like a community garden plot that encourages people to put their homes on a map, so that people know where to go around the city to be able to harvest food. Things like that are so fabulous. So the CSAs are really important, but I think that there isn't anything being done to address kind of everybody else.
Okay, so let's move over to Michael Chuisano now. He's the owner of the Naked Farm in East Marion, New York, and he farms biointensively microgreens and veggies, and he's been doing that for about 2 years. Michael, you say despite the pandemic, you've never been busier. So tell us a bit about that.
Well, right before the pandemic, during the winter, I was growing microgreens. And what I was doing was I was putting out a weekly email to about 25 people of the availability of what microgreens I was growing that particular week. And they'd send me an order, I'd fill it, bag it, and they would come directly to the farm and just pick it up. That worked really well. Now I started growing field crop, and the field crop were already, and most of my business last year was through the restaurants. And when it was all ready to go, restaurants were closed. So I said, okay, how am I going to do this now? You know, I have all this stuff almost ready in the field, and I have no one to sell it to. So I took that same list of 25 people, and I said, let me just continue doing the same thing. So I would send out an email every week of what's available price-wise. They'd respond and give me an order. I would fill it, you know, pull it out, wash it, pack it, bag it, put it on the front porch at the farm stand with a little cash can, and, you know, I accept checks and stuff like that. And it worked perfectly. So now by word of mouth, that 25 people turned into 50 people. And then that 50 people turned into 100 people. Now, excuse me, I almost have 150 people. I couldn't continue to pack this stuff. That was too long, you know. So I opened up the farm stand again, but on the farm, not at the location in town. And it's usually on a Friday, and those same 150 people come to the farm stand, and it's the same reaction all the time. Once they look at my vegetables and see the color and, you know, the quality,
And the taste is fantastic.
And the taste, and I'm not doing anything that hasn't been done before in Europe and in Asia. It's just the way it was farmed there, and I just do it here, you know, using organic matter and using compost, the correct compost. I mean, I have people that still have ties in Italy and Sicily that come up to me and say, I haven't seen this since I've been home, you know, and the quality speaks for itself. And that's why right now, I was on that farm this morning going crazy and trying to get ready, but it grows geometrically in sales every week. I mean, and I've only had the farm stand open itself for the past 3 weeks. Before that, it was all microgreens because nothing really was ready in the field. So
tell us a bit about what you mean by biointensive. Is it a lot being produced in a very small holding?
Yes, biointensive farming, bio meaning we use the biology of the land, the living soil. So I use no other chemicals or man-made fertilizer. It's all about the biology of the soil. The intensiveness is the space. So I never step on any of my beds. It's based on a permanent 30-inch wide bed system, and those beds never get stepped on. There's no hard pan. That enables the roots of these vegetables to grow straight down. They do not compete on a horizontal like a conventional farm. And I refer to conventional farming here as big mechanized farms. In Europe, the way I'm farming is their conventional farm. They think we're crazy. They really do. We just use too much space to farm. But anyway, so that enables those roots to grow straight down. Now that enables me on a 30-inch wide bed to grow 5 rows of radishes at 1 inch apart spacing. Wow. And because their roots grow straight down, they'll shoulder each other. It's just like riding the subway in Manhattan at rush hour. You shoulder, but you know, you're still standing. They grow straight down, and they grow incredible. I mean, I do it with beets, with carrots, and it's just quick turnaround, and it just works perfectly. It works absolutely perfect.
So do you think anyone can do this? I mean, you didn't come from a farming background. I know you did a kind of apprenticeship to go from one to another, but.
Correct. I'm just going to go over, I'd like to go over the actual mechanics. I mean, it's so basic and it makes so much sense. You start out, let's say, your backyard. If it's a lawn, all right, you need to clear that lawn. It could be 20 by 20 feet. You could get, 5 beds out of that, 4 beds out of that 30-inch wide by 20 feet long. That'd grant you a lot of crop. You could really produce a lot of crop out of that. What I do is I cover the bed, not the bed, I cover the entire area with a black silage top, or any top that you get from Home Depot that's black, 6 mil top. And I leave it on there it needs heat. So I start, let's say in March, I left it on all over the summer, and over the winter, the next spring, when you lift that top up, the soil is perfect. And there's a couple of things that does. One, it deprives all the weeds and the grasses and everything of sunlight and water. So everything dies off. So now it also tricks the earthworms into working 24 hours a day. An earthworm knows by nature not to come up during the daytime because it'll get eaten by the birds. So now I cover that, and they think it's nighttime all the time. And these guys are workers. They're my best workers. There's no union dues. There's none of that stuff. It's great. It's so good. So now they're working 24/7, and they're coming up to the surface right under that plastic. And now that all that stuff is dead on top, that's worm food. They're eating that, and they're going down, and they're pooping those worm castings, and they're going back, and they're aerating. And all that magic happens in the first 12 inches of the soil. Everything else below that is mineral. And that's exactly what you want. So all that poop, and that's the organic matter that you need, along with the other microbiology that's in the soil. But that's what you need in order to start healthy soil. Once you take that off, that whole field is cleared. You think that somebody went in there with, a flame weeder and flamed it or something. So now you have to go in. Now it's hard panned. You need to till that. And that's the only time you till is the first time. So you need a rototiller or somebody with a tractor, unfortunately, and they have to go in there and just, get rid of that hard pan. You do that one time. And now you actually go in there with a smaller tiller and you hit the ground again a couple of times. You rake out all the debris, the rocks, you let it sit for a while, you let the rain and the wind do its thing. Then you go in and till it one more time, you rake the rocks out again, and now you're ready to form your beds. So basically, I just stake out 30-inch wide beds with a 14 or 18-inch footpath in between, and that's what you walk in all the time. You never, ever step on the beds. Now what you have to do is you broad fork. A broad fork is basically a 30-inch wide digging fork. It's a regular pitchfork that everybody has in their garage. You could actually use that, so you don't have to go out and buy it. And what you do with that is you stick it in the ground, and the initial time it's very difficult because the soil is a little hard yet. So you go in and you stick it in the ground, you crack it back just at a 45-degree angle. What you're doing is you're aerating and you're loosening up the soil. You do that every 12 inches and you go down the whole length of the bed. It's actually a lot of fun. You're not breaking your back. It's easy work. You're watching the birds and all this stuff going on. It's really cool. Now the important part comes. Now you want to start adding your compost and your amendments. Now the amendments, you need to have soil samples taken, and I send my soil samples to a company called Waypoint Analytical. They're based all over the United States. These guys do intensive testing. It's minimal cost, and these guys are really good to work with. You tell them, they have a nice little form. You tell them exactly what you're growing, and they send back the results, and they let you know exactly what you need to amend with. So you can't go at this blindly. You need to have some kind of diagram to go by. So what I do is I add compost first, and this is screened manure compost from the Vermont Compost Company. They're probably the best on the East Coast. They know their stuff. I mean, it is the best, and that's one of the challenges that somebody starting up is going to have in finding that type of compost. Not everybody does that anymore, especially on Long Island, because we on an aquifer, and because of that, they limit the use of the ownership of livestock per acre because of all the waste that goes into the water supply and the nitrogen, and it's attributed, it has been linked to fish kill and a lot of other stuff. So the manure compost is a hard thing to find, but anyway, you could get around it. And now I add my amendments. I add pelletized chicken manure, alfalfa meal, which is incredible stuff because that is actual worm food. I mean, I could go into that field with a flashlight at night and I see the worms actually have pieces of that little alfalfa meal and they're going back into the ground. I mean, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. And that's the way it should be done. And then I add a little peat just to balance the pH, and that's it. And that's all I use. And I tilt it in because now you never go in with a tiller anymore. You just mix those amendments on top. And all you need is a rake. You don't need anything else than a regular garden rake to do that, especially when you're 29 years old. And you just kind of, you prep your bed, you mix it in, and then you're ready to plant. And it's just a beautiful thing. So you seed whatever you need to. And because you're on a small space, I concentrate on what's called high rotation, high value crop. That means that nothing stays in that ground over 45 days. I'll do radishes, for instance. I could do my beds are all standardized 45 feet long by 30 inches wide. So I'll do a half a bed of radishes and I'll yield, 100 bunches of radishes from that. And that's a 29-day crop, sometimes 27 days. That comes out, something else goes right in. Weed pressure is basically nil. Insect pressure is nil, and disease pressure is nil because you turn over so fast, you don't give these guys a chance to even settle in there. So the soil stays healthy, and every time I turn a bed over, I amend the same way. I add the compost, and I add the other amendments, and that conditions the soil. That actually is adding, after you broad fork, that makes its way down into the existing soil, and it just gives you the perfect growing medium. You cannot get any better growing medium than that, and it gives you the highest quality vegetables that you could grow on the face of this earth. It's just incredible, and the results are outstanding.
Okay, Michael, we're going to have to get this written down because I know people want this methodology to be able to use it. We've already got questions. 2 people have asked, what is the name of, is it White Point Analytical that you mentioned?
Waypoint, W-A-Y-P-O-I-N-T. Great people to deal with. The closest to us, I think, is Pennsylvania, but they're based all over the country.
Okay, so I just wanted to get that out of the way. Okay, so I want to move over quickly because I wish we had more time because there's so much good stuff. I'm now going to speak to Ronnie down there in Mexico. Thank you for making the time again to join us. Ronnie's been marooned in Mexico. Well, not really, because he's got a farming school. He runs a 75-acre biodynamic farm, and it's also a school for young farmers. So Ronnie, in a nutshell, you sent me a wonderful synopsis of the 7 characteristics of your practice, and you seem to have created an entirely sustainable system down there with experience, hard work, and innovation. So perhaps you could tell us a bit about what that means, biodynamic farming, where you are down there.
I manage 2 farms. One of them's in northeast Minnesota, where the weather's pretty severe up there, and where we're trying to use techniques, permaculture techniques for the far north to grow a lot of food during our short growing season. But we also have pioneered what's called a deep winter greenhouse there. I think there's only 4 of them in Minnesota. But there's a way to use solar energy, and you have like 5-foot deep cellar, sort of rock cellar in your greenhouse, and we're growing vegetables when it's 30 below 0.
30 below.
What we've got to do, though, is we've got to get the cost of those deep grow really nice organic vegetables throughout the year, even in northern Minnesota with a climate like Siberia. But the other half of the year, besides my activism and writing and so on, I manage a farm in the high desert of north central Mexico. And our challenge here is, it's not that it gets too cold in the winter. Our challenge here is that it only rains 4 months a year. It's raining right now, thank goodness, but we've been waiting for almost 8 months for the rains to start. So we run a farm school here. We've got 75 acres, and we teach young farmers and we teach small farmers, organic permaculture techniques on a very diversified farm with all kind of livestock, with all kind of fruits and vegetables. But the big challenge, we do not have a well. And the reason we don't have a well is because 86% of Mexican farmers don't have a well, and they're not going to get a well. They depend on seasonal rain and catching the rain. There's 4 million family farms left in Mexico, quite a bit more than there are in the US, but no one, literally, the government says over 90% run a deficit. No one can make a living from their farming. And so that's the reason why you see so many Mexican and Central American people trying to immigrate to the United States. They're trying to feed their families. So we're dealing with a situation where the average rural household income is $400 a month or $5,000 a year. So it's about 1/10 of the average household income in the United States. So we're dealing with people who are living in poverty for the most part, rural people, but we're also dealing with people who have access, they have more access to land in Mexico because of the Mexican Revolution. The majority of land in this country, over 200 million acres of farmland, is in the hands of these rural communities, or they're kind of like co-ops. They call them ejidos, and they own most of the land in common. They have their private holdings of 2 to 4 acres, but a community would at times have a couple of thousand acres owned communally together. But the problem with most of the land in Mexico, 60% of it is very similar to what we have around here. If you have semi-arid, arid land, which is what 40% of the world's farmland is, it's very difficult to grow crops, especially if you don't have irrigation. Very difficult. And it's becoming nearly impossible to grow the traditional corn and beans and squash and other staple crops because of the weather. So we have embarked on a very exciting program here of trying to adapt to climate change, trying to adapt to erratic weather, trying to restore lands. You can hear the lightning there in the background, thank goodness. And a couple of farmers figured out something in desperation that literally had never been figured out in thousands of years, which is that a couple or one of the primary desert plants that we have, that we're blessed with here in semi-arid, arid land is agave. And there's 140 varieties of agave. And they grow basically on 20% of the world's landscapes right now. They grow in these areas that are very difficult to farm. They grow where the poorest of the poor live. In Mexico, Central America, Southwestern, I mean, it's the same climate in Southwestern US, but Southern Africa has this terrain, India, large parts of China, Australia, Asia. So it's a huge swath of the world's lands. And our goal is to produce crops, native crops that will sequester the maximum amount of carbon and restore the environment while alleviating poverty. And so the amazing discovery we made a year ago, because these farmers came to one of our workshops on our farm about organic compost and bokasia type biointensive farming, they said, have you ever heard of people chopping off the leaves or the pencas of these giant agave plants and fermenting them? Because the problem with agave leaves, the pencas, up until now, they have compounds in them that are indigestible for animals. They have a lot of biomass. I mean, we're producing 60 tons of biomass on 2.5 acres every year on a continuous basis with these crops. But what good are they if you can't use most of the plant? So they figured that out. It's like with humans. Fermenting certain foods is really good for our health. And so what we have started doing, and they also invented a machine to chop these up efficiently. And we are using these 5-gallon buckets or 20-liter buckets to put the chopped up agave in. You ferment it for 30 days, and the saponins and the lectins in there before transform into carbohydrates and sugar. And so what you end up with is looks like golden coleslaw. And first the animals kind of sniff at it. What the hell is this? And but then they start liking it. And it turns out, we've sent it to the lab, it turns out to be incredibly nutritious once it's fermented. And then, well, the protein level, and it's 1/4 of the price of alfalfa or hay. Alfalfa is too water intensive for this area and for other semi-arid, arid areas of the world, but it's still grown on a massive scale. It uses 26 times the amount of water that these native desert plants use. And you don't have the water anyway if you don't have a well. So anyway, if you look at a desert landscape, the 20% of the world that already has agaves, and it could be 40% of the world if we spread this a little, they also have trees. You look at them, wow, they're not very impressive, like mesquite trees in West Texas or the Southwest. They're considered a nuisance by most farmers and ranchers until recently. But these trees are acacia trees in Africa, Lucania, I think you pronounce it, in Australia. These are nitrogen fixing trees that live in degraded semi-arid, arid environments. And they typically have bean pods on them. And so the mesquite bean pods, farmers have known this for a long time, and indigenous people have known this. Those pods are edible for animals and humans a certain time of the year, and they have high protein. So what we discovered working with these farmers down here is if you ferment the mesquite pods with the chopped up agave, you end up with something far better than alfalfa at a fraction of the cost. Wow. And animals, even though they can thrive from grazing and just eating the agave, fermented agave, during the dry season, when there's not much, the grass is dead out there, if you want your breeding stock, the mamas and the papas to be healthy, they need that higher protein. If you can't afford alfalfa, you give them this mix, or if you're milking the goats, or if you're milking the cows. And so this is unbelievable. We've discovered in our county here, if we can plant this agave mesquite into this landscape at the scale possible, 2,000 to 3,000 plants per hectare or 1,000 plants per acre, we can sequester all the carbon emissions in the whole county with 30,000 acres under deployment. That's about 10% of the land in this county or municipality is enough with these high carbon, high biomass producing continuous systems to solve the climate problem. And this county happens to be very famous in Mexico, San Miguel de Allende. It's considered the cradle of liberty. It's a World Heritage Site. It's 480 years old, the city. So the whole country looks at this county. And even though there's 2,400 counties in Mexico, 60% of the terrain is like this. And so you literally, this could make farming, subsistence farming, and livestock management start to make money. This entire system, we're certifying organic so that we will have lamb in the marketplace at a premium price, certified organic and biodynamic, because we believe in biodynamic, the next stage of organic. So we're excited. We've sat down with the national government reforestation program. We're working with the county. We're working with the state people. And the poverty is intense and it's growing. And the drug lords have made much of the country a pretty scary place. But we still have people on the land. We still have people who want to farm. We still have these idealistic young people who are, as I talk to you today, we're planting thousands. We're transplanting thousands of agaves. And these kids are like, you know, they're out of school because of the pandemic. You know, they're desperate for work, but they have smiles all the way across their face. And they're learning about the climate. They're learning about organics. They're learning about the value of their traditions. And they are going to produce a crop, which is amazing. So wow. I'm very enthusiastic about this. That's what's held me here for the last 3 months and 9 months, the last 12 months. But I'm coming back to the US actually tomorrow, and we're going to drive. But I am very anxious to talk with some of the Navajo sheep herders that I've started to have conversations with. I'm very anxious to talk to the people in the Southwest United States who have this same terrain because the water situation is getting worse and worse that they're facing as well. And I really believe that we are going to see young people like we did in the 60s. I think we're going to see young people start moving back to the land and farming regeneratively. I think we're going to see native traditions and rural traditions be brought up to the 21st century with all the innovations that permaculture and organic and, you know, regenerative farmers have made. So basically I'm fired up, and I think it's an uphill battle here, but Mother Nature had the solution right in front of our eyes. We just didn't know what to look for, and now we're going full blast. So that's my story, even though I can't hear you. Hopefully you've been able to hear me.
We heard every word. Very inspirational, Ronnie. I mean, really inspirational, and really hopeful that this might be the panacea for the problem that we're all going to encounter shortly with the climate crisis. Okay, you bring up a very important point, which is you guys reuse your seeds like a time-honored tradition. Every farmer kept his seeds and reused them. Now, the Monsantos of this world want to annihilate all that, and they've been very successful in doing this, even in the third world. So we have a question here from somebody. If there was a message you could send to big agriculture besides the egregious misuse of chemicals, what would it be? Okay, anybody? Anybody? Ronnie can't hear.
I can do a part of it.
Go ahead.
Or just one answer. I think I hold big ag and like the, you know, our relationship in our national food system with big ag pretty much responsible for the fact that it's cheaper to buy, you know, a bag of chips or a prepackaged food than it is to buy a head of broccoli. and have or organic produce. And I think that I would love to send a social, like, justice, like, people coming together message to Big Ag that we would rather have the broccoli and we want to put our money into local agriculture, and we don't want the kind of mass scale farming culture that we've landed with.
Michael, do you have anything to
Yes,
say?
yeah, decisions like that, like you have to ask yourself, why would chemical companies want to get involved with seed companies? And every big decision that's made is money based, and that's it. Ronnie brought up a point at the last podcast, and he said all these big ags, all these big farms are government subsidized, and there's so many of them that are not even producing edible food. It's corn for cows, it's corn for ethanol, and this is huge. So chemical companies are making big money because you need to spray all of this stuff, and it just goes on and on and on. We're selling soybeans to China, and it just goes on, and it's huge, and it gets big. So everything's based upon that. The government should be subsidizing farmers like us who are feeding our country, and the right way, not for non-edible stuff. I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. That's why, and I'm going to plug this one, I use Johnny's Selected Seed of Maine, because those people are an employee-owned company and they refuse to sell to Monsanto or any of the other. I don't understand it. Well, I do understand it because it's all money-based, and it's politics, and it goes round and round and round and round. That's my thought.
We've got a couple more questions. I don't know if if Ronnie's able to see the questions. Somebody said, do you think urban farming, for example, on rooftops and yards and vacant lots is viable? Anybody?
You know what? They're doing it in Brooklyn. They're doing it all over the city. It's kind of a romantic thing that you're going to farm and feed the city. I don't think that's possible. But what's great is that these food stores have rooftop farms, and they're selling the vegetables that they're growing on their roofs. That's the best, because you're feeding your community locally. You're not getting produce in from, we're in New York, from California or from Mexico or from Canada, and it travels all that way and gets that makes no sense to me whatsoever. When we have it, we can do it right here. It is a romantic notion, like I said, that you're going to feed your city. I think it's impossible, but it's a good start. It's a good start. Now, I'd like to see more of that. I mean, in Red Hook, Brooklyn, on a basketball court, on an old basketball court that still has the blacktop, they're growing vegetables the way I grow them, because all you need is that top 12 inches, and it's working out beautifully over there. So it's doable.
And on Fenway Park, Fenway Farm.
Right, in Fenway Park. Very good. Very good. Very good.
I don't know if Ronnie's getting the messages we're typing. Oh yeah, he's posted his website for people that want it, and also Via Organica, I think, is another one down in Mexico, the farm itself, which I can post later on our website. All these links that you've mentioned, I think we should put to people's attention. And Addy, you mentioned green something. And
yeah, there's a couple organizations I think that are doing really incredible work. In Massachusetts, Greenbelt is trying to connect landowners to farmers, but there's also some really fabulous organizations that I've been really inspired by recently. Like there's this collective called Earth Seed Land Collective in North Carolina that's doing really amazing work. I've been following them pretty closely for the last couple of months, and it's sort of like this organization that's up here. It's new entry. It's through Tufts University, where they host farmers. They host young farmers who are trying to start a business and give them access to a quarter acre if they complete their training, and then they give them access to all of the equipment and support their initial startup venture, which is really, really amazing. But the other one, Earthseed Land Collective, is the same sort of idea. They're in North Carolina, and they do a lot of education work and trying to foster the growth of small scale agriculture in the younger folks.
I think if local government took this on years ago, I'm going to say 20 years ago now, my brother, who's a gardener, did a course that was sponsored by the government to how to convert your interest in gardening into a business. And he did it, and they had to run a plot of land, overseed, managed the entire thing for 6 months. And it worked. He's been very successful. So I think if there was a will, my worry is that the big Monsanto people who, only yesterday are still fighting this poor man over Roundup that got his award. Yeah. I mean, every single day they're in court chiseling away back to prove that Roundup doesn't cause cancer and this and that. So do you really think that we can take on the volume of that power and control and the lobbyists they have in Washington?
Well, what Michael said. No, absolutely. I was actually just going to credit you. I mean, it's with the money. It's where the money goes. You know what I mean?
Yes.
If the consumer cares and more people are educated to want to support this kind of agriculture, Monsanto's not going to live. You know what I mean? I think it's actually, Mary, I don't know if you want to read Ronnie's message to Big Ag, but it's beautiful. I don't know if it's to everybody, but my message to Big Ag is that your chemical and energy intensive system is no longer viable. We're building an organic and regenerative system for the 21st century and beyond. And I think that that's perfect.
Excellent. Thank you, Ronnie. We're managing despite the challenges of the technology.
It is definitely rolling out there. There's projects around the United States that are going on. There's a project that just started, Raleigh City Farms. Josh Satin is heading that up. He actually took a lot of land, and he's the local government's helping him out. He has interns, and he's basically feeding a big part of this section of Raleigh. Then there's one, I explained this on the last podcast. It's called it's the first agri-hood in the United States. It is in Mesa, Arizona. It's called Steadfast Farms. What they did was they built a community, a brand new community with 100 and some odd homes with restaurants. And within this community, they have a farm, and he farms the same way I do, biointensively, and he feeds this whole community. Not only does he feed the community, there's restaurants and stores that he supplies, and it's working out so well that they just did another version of it in northern Arizona, Steadfast Farm. So it's getting there. It's getting there.
Okay, I hate to harp back to this, but because it just worries me that what do you do if you have a nice little organic plot and Monsanto happened to be down the street, which has happened to so many farmers, and their GM seed gets onto your property and they sue you and they win. Yeah. I mean, how do we handle that? That's
a rough call. They have more money than I do.
Exactly.
I couldn't fight that cause.
Exactly. And he's bankrupted farmers, the good farmers that have tried to go to court. So I think there has to be a public acknowledgement, as you say, of what they want, what we want in our food and what we're willing to pay for it and what we don't want in our food. It shouldn't be something like a mysterious GM seed that you don't know about. No. It should be GM labeled as it was originally designed to be. So I'm on my soapbox here. Ronnie, I don't think he can hear us.
Do you want me to type it to him, Mary?
Yeah, I think he might want to have a last word on this. Okay, we got another question here. How do you feel about fertilizers from biodigesters that process municipal compost? Anybody know about that?
I'm unfamiliar.
Well, I think, so I have a classmate, a former high school classmate who's really into New York City's compost system. And so I know a little bit about it. And I I think that one of the worries that some farmers feel about using municipal compost is just that you don't know what is being put into it. So often if like lawn clippings end up in that, or like other foods that maybe aren't organic, and you're trying to be an organic farm, you end up with chemicals in your soil.
And pathogens too.
And yeah. And I think that I think that most farmers, because they have a pretty small profit margin, unless they're doing what Michael's doing and have that like intensive attitude, if they're trying to farm a lot, I think that they oh, you're helping me, human waste is put into it. Nope,
yeah, that's exactly what I meant by pathogens.
Didn't know about that part. Nope.
Because I know somebody who's got a composting toilet, and that's one of the issues with composting toilets. Is you have to put UV light over it before you can use the compost.
Okay.
To try and kill off the viruses and what have you. Yeah, so I think we've all established this human waste in municipal compost.
The human waste has been used in compost again since the beginning of time. I mean, in Asia, it has been, but it has to be done right. And they've been doing it for thousands of years, so they figured it out. If you do that wrong, you could get violently ill. You can't put anything, like that. So
a lot of soil.
Yes, of course, it is a natural thing, but it has to be seasoned. It has to be, done properly, and you really have to know what you're doing. But yes, it's like I said, it's been around since the beginning of time.
Okay, so somebody said here, Lynn has said, I think some only use food and paper. So you'd have to find out. And then somebody else has put digesters that co-compost and yard and food scraps with sludge to make energy have PFAs and pharmaceuticals. Pathogens aren't a problem. So you've got residual pharmaceuticals.
I think you should.
As if we don't have enough chemicals.
Maybe ask Ronnie about this. I don't know. I know that there's some permaculture farmers do make their own biodigesters to process like their own waste in order to have, like, they don't use it on like vegetables that are going to be sold, right then. But I do believe that they use it both to create energy and also to put on for fertilizer for growing animal feed, like hay and things like that. Maybe he might have something.
Well, while I'm typing that, I've got another question for you, which is really quite interesting because we've got two opposite ends of the income spectrum here. We've got Ronnie, who's working with very poor people, really subsistence farmers, trying to make a living off the land. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where you've got pretty high-end customers. I'd say, Michael, maybe your customers are pretty high-end, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So how do we get something in the middle where it's not, it's not some kind of luxury to go shopping and pay, I've seen it on Long Island, people paying, $4 for an avocado because they don't think about that. Well, the fact is, you shouldn't good food be affordable. I mean, how do we bridge that gap?
Absolutely. Now, I'll give you a perfect example. So, let's just say in the dead of winter, my wife goes to the local store and she comes home with a 3-pack of romaine lettuce in the dead of winter. And she opens it up and 2 of them are going bad already. All right. So for what she paid for that, if somebody's paying $1 more for a head of my lettuce that I just pulled, and that's going to last, you clean the leaves and put it in a bag with a paper towel, and that's going to stay in your refrigerator. And 100% of that is absolutely perfect. And that's going to last you a week in the refrigerator. It may be more cost effective for you to buy my stuff than it would be to go pay for that. And you got to go back and buy it again because
plus you're supporting a local economy and not the mass trucking of something 3,000.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the economics, I understand. I just wonder how you can make organics mainstream and affordable for people.
I think it has a lot to do with scale. I think that the more people feel like they can form relationships with people who are growing food right in their community, the more affordable it will be because we're shifting the economy away from the national scale and into the local scale. More people are growing, more people are exchanging, and there's kind of this like self-sufficiency that happens that kind of, brings more balance to it. And I think too, there are a lot of efforts by farmers, like that I know personally, to make sure that their produce is accessible as it possibly can be. It's just that their profit margins are all very, very tight. So trying to make sliding scale a reality, or asking people who are more affluent to pay just a little bit extra to subsidize someone else's share, I think those are like micro solutions that can happen on a farm. And then I think that the other part is too, there's this perception around organic, locally grown food that it is very affluent. So we haven't managed to capture the attention of people who think of that as like a privileged option, to like get them to invest into local agriculture as well. And I think that's an education problem and attitude shift that needs to happen on the local scale as well. I actually taught a first grade program with Backyard Growers, the organization I mentioned in Gloucester, where we did this experiment where they each got to play a role. So I had one option was, a customer goes to a farmer's market and they buy a tomato from a farmer. And so we gave the kid, fake money. They had $3. They took that $3. They went to their farmer. They gave the farmer $3. They took their tomato. They went home. Then we had a second example where we used more kids, and each one got to play a role of, farmer, truck driver, processing center, all the different steps that go from moving produce across the country or out of the country into the country. And by the end of it, each kid had maybe a nickel, and they were like, well, this isn't fair, And I was like, yeah. If you can see that 5 or 6, it makes sense.
Well, that's actually one of my last questions, is that if farming, basic farming and growing methods were taught in school as part of the main curriculum, like you have domestic science, this is, basic agrarian skills. I mean, is this something that would take the bad image about farming being a viable career? Would it make it more respectable and more achievable? Do you think?
Absolutely. Especially in a place like here, we're in an agricultural community. I mean, it should be taught, and it should be taught the right way and the reachable way, the obtainable way, the manageable way, and the profitable way. And it's possible. It's very possible without using a large amount of space. Like Addy mentioned, up here in the Northeast, land is very expensive, probably the most expensive next to California than anywhere in the United States. So you really got to tighten that up, and you can be profitable. There's a couple of farmers that I followed. Connor Crickmore from Neversink Farm. He's up in Claryville, New York. He farms 1.33 acres, and he does $300,000 in sales a year on 1.33 acres. I mean, it's doable. It's reachable. You have to start somewhere, but you could get to that point. So education, yes, absolutely.
Also love the education part that kind of removes some stigma around farming. It's not just about like the financial part of it, but also I think that there's a perception by a lot of people that farmers aren't like smart, or that they would have gone into a different career, or like there are other things that they could do. Why would you break your body to do this thing? And I've never felt like I've used more parts of my brain than when I'm farming. You have to know so many different things. You have to troubleshoot. You're interacting. You're like a salesperson, and you have to learn how to be alone all the time. You know what I mean? I think that there's education around like the joys of it, and all of the ways in which farming matters, right? Like knowing about soil science, knowing about advertising. It's important to do the full education.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we've lost Ronnie. I think first we couldn't hear him, and now I think he's dropped off. I hope he comes back before we have to close the program. I'm just seeing this. Someone's written some more about biodigestive composting. Many cities use only food waste, but they don't compost it the way we normally think. They grind the food into slurry, compost it very intensively to produce methane, siphoned off for energy. The rest is sludge. I'm pretty sure I've got that right. But the City of Cambridge has information on its website about what happens to the stuff we put into the compost system. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Heather Holman. Okay. Well, I could talk to you all for about another hour because there's so many more things we could cover. I just think this has been so valuable for so many people, because each of you is doing something slightly different on different scales in different parts of the world. And I think it's all makes it all achievable and desirable for people to be able to be involved in this. And it gives us some sort of hope in the climate crisis, particularly the stuff that Ronnie's been saying. I mean, to have a totally, desperately deprived environment resource-wise, and to be able to come up with solutions that may help a large section of the world. I think that's magnificent. It's really great work with all your students, Ronnie. All right, so I'm going to give you a task before we say cheerio. You have to write this pamphlet up, even if it's online, Michael, about, Beginner's Farmer's Guide 101. Addy, I want to know all about preserving for idiots and beginners, because I think this is so important that we don't lose these skills. We haven't all got grandmothers, unfortunately, that pass these things on. And then Ronnie, well, Ronnie's already written the book, so I think he's probably on the next one, right? So what can I say, but thank you all so much. This has been such a great and valuable program. But before you all run off, we've just got to do a little closing credit here. So thank you everyone for listening to Cambridge Forum today with our talented and knowledgeable farmers, Addy Shreffler, Michael Chuisano, and Ronnie Cummings, coming to us from Mexico, despite the thunder and lightning. Cambridge Forum has been made possible through the generosity of Herbert and Dorothy Vetter, also supported by the Lowell Institute, the Massachusetts Cultural Council, and First Parish Church in Cambridge. Thanks to everyone that joined us. A podcast of this program will be available shortly. Also, details of future programs are on the website, www.cambridgeforum.org, and all the ones you missed you can watch. And also a video is going to be available of this shortly. WGBH Forum Network will upload it to YouTube. So I hope to see you all soon. Bye for now. Bye Ronnie, bye Michael, bye Addy.
Thank you, Mary.